My insane coworker uninvited me from my wedding because I'm gay, then demanded I house sit for a month while he goes on his honeymoon. I refused, so he started harassing me at work and tried to break into my house. I've been friends with my coworker John for almost 10 years now, but because I'm gay, I wasn't invited to his wedding. When I found out, I asked him if there was a mistake with the invites, but he said it was his fiance's decision. She doesn't want my kind attending the wedding. Apparently, her parents are homophobic and would not be afraid to cause a scene because a gay person is at the wedding. I was visibly upset when he said this, but he put his arm around me and said he wanted to remain friends. He didn't speak another word to me until after the wedding, when he randomly called. He told me he needed a favor. Him and his wife were going on their month-long honeymoon and needed someone to visit their house twice a day to take care of their cat. I responded saying there was no way I'd do that for him after he showed me what our friendship meant to me, and that's when he went off on me. He was drunk when he said this, so I kinda forgive him, but he called me a slur and told me I would suffer in purgatory for my sins. He's religious. I hung up on him, but he called me again the next day, begging me to care for the house while they're gone. Apparently, if I don't do it, nobody will, which means their honeymoon will be canceled, and that'll be $15,000 down the drain. John's wife's voice came through the phone, sharper now. You don't understand what you're doing to us. John is a wreck because of this. He can't sleep, can't eat. You're going to ruin his career if this stress keeps up. I closed my eyes, trying to keep calm. I'm not ruining anything. I'm just not taking responsibility for something that isn't my problem. It is your problem, she insisted. You were his friend for a decade. You think you can just throw that away over one little disagreement? One little disagreement? I repeated, incredulous. You excluded me from his wedding because of who I am. That's not a little disagreement. That's you making it clear you don't see me as an equal, as someone worthy of basic respect. She sighed heavily. Look, I get it. You're upset, but the wedding's over. It's in the past. Can't we just move on? I shook my head, even though she couldn't see me. I'm not the one who needs to move on. I'm fine where I am. You're unbelievable, she said, her voice tight with frustration. Do you know what it's like to have your entire life's happiness hinge on one person's decision? To have everything you've ever planned come crashing down because of one stubborn person? Yes, I said quietly. I do. She was silent for a moment, and I wondered if she'd finally understood. But then she spoke again, her voice icy. Fine, be that way, but don't be surprised when you have no friends left. People talk, and you're not exactly making yourself look good. The line went dead before I could respond. I set the phone down, my hands shaking. I knew I was doing the right thing by standing up for myself, but that didn't make it any easier. I felt isolated, like I was alone in a room full of people who couldn't or wouldn't see my side. Over the next few weeks, things continued to escalate. Every few days, I'd find something new on my desk. More Bible verses, nasty notes scribbled on post-it pads, even a small rainbow flag that had been slashed through with a knife. It was surreal, like I was living in some kind of twisted movie where everyone had turned against me. I kept going to HR, reporting each incident, but they didn't seem to take it seriously. It's probably just a joke, one of the HR reps said dismissively when I showed her the shredded flag. You know how people can be. I didn't bother trying to explain that it wasn't a joke to me, that it felt like a threat. Instead, I started documenting everything myself. I took pictures of the notes, kept a log of every conversation I had with HR. Every time John or his wife tried to contact me, it felt paranoid, but I needed to protect myself. I couldn't trust anyone else to do it. One evening, after a particularly rough day at work, I came home to find my front door ajar. I froze on the threshold, my heart pounding. I knew I'd locked it when I left that morning. Slowly, I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The living room was in chaos. Furniture was overturned, papers strewn everywhere, and a large, ugly slur was spray-painted across the wall. I backed out of the house, my hands shaking as I fumbled for my phone. I dialed 911, trying to keep my voice steady as I explained what had happened. The dispatcher assured me that officers were on their way, but it felt like an eternity before I saw the flashing lights of a patrol car pull up to the curb. The officers were calm and professional as they took my statement, but I could tell they didn't really believe me when I said I thought it was connected to my situation at work. Do you have any proof that your coworker is involved? One of them asked. No, I admitted, feeling a wave of helplessness wash over me. But I know it's him, or his wife. The officer nodded, jotting something down in his notebook. We'll look into it. In the meantime, you might want to think about staying somewhere else for a few days, just to be safe. I nodded numbly, watching as they dusted for fingerprints and took pictures of the damage. By the time they left, I felt completely drained. I spent the night at a friend's house, lying awake on their couch, staring at the ceiling and wondering how my life had come to this. The next morning, I called in sick to work. I couldn't face John, couldn't deal with the whispers and the stares and the endless feeling of being under siege. Instead, I spent the day making arrangements to have my locks changed, looking into security cameras, and trying to figure out what I was supposed to do next. That afternoon, I got another call from John. I stared at the phone for a long time before finally picking up. "Why are you doing this to me?" he demanded, his voice raw and angry. "Why are you trying to destroy my life?" "I'm not doing anything to you, John," I said, my voice shaking. "I'm just trying to protect myself." "Protect yourself?" he repeated, incredulous. "From what? I'm not the one breaking into your house." "How do I know that?" I shot back. "You've been harassing me for weeks. You or your wife, it's the same thing." He let out a harsh laugh. "You're paranoid. You always have been. No wonder you can't keep friends." I felt a sharp stab of pain at his words, but I forced myself to stay calm. "I'm not going to argue with you, John. Just leave me alone. I don't want anything to do with you." "Fine," he snapped. "But don't say I didn't warn you. People like you always end up alone." He hung up, and I sat there, staring at the phone in my hand. I felt hollow, like I'd been scooped out and left empty. I knew I'd done the right thing by standing up for myself, but it didn't feel good. It felt like I was losing everything. Over the next few days, I started looking for a new job. It wasn't easy. I'd been at my current company for almost a decade, and the thought of starting over somewhere else was terrifying. But I couldn't stay. Not with John and his wife there, not with the constant harassment and the feeling that I was always looking over my shoulder. I went to a few interviews, trying to stay positive, but it was hard. I felt like I was in a fog, like I was moving through my life on autopilot. I kept thinking about all the years I'd spent at my current job, all the memories I had there. It was painful to let go, but I knew I didn't have a choice. Then, one day, I got a call from HR. They wanted to meet with me about my complaint. I felt a flicker of hope as I walked into the conference room, but it quickly died when I saw who was there. John, his wife, and a stern-looking HR manager I'd never met before. "We've reviewed your complaint," the manager said, her voice brisk and professional. "And we've spoken with John and his wife. They've both denied any involvement in the incidents you've described." I stared at her, disbelief flooding through me. "But I have proof. Photos. Notes. You've seen them." She nodded, but her expression didn't change. "We've considered all the evidence, but there's nothing that directly ties them to the harassment." I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. "So what are you saying? That it's all in my head?" "We're saying that without concrete evidence, there's nothing more we can do." She glanced down at the folder in front of her. "However, we can offer you a severance package if you choose to resign." I felt cold all over. "You want me to quit?" "We're giving you the option," she said smoothly. "We understand that this has been a difficult time for you, and we want to support you in making the best decision for your mental health and well-being." I looked at John, who was watching me with a blank expression, his wife smirking beside him. I felt a surge of anger, but it was swallowed up by a wave of exhaustion. I was so tired of fighting, so tired of trying to prove myself to people who didn't care. "I'll think about it," I said finally, standing up and walking out of the room. I felt their eyes on my back as I left, but I didn't look back. That night, I sat in my living room, staring at the offer letter they'd emailed me. The severance package was decent, enough to tide me over for a few months while I looked for something new, but accepting it felt like admitting defeat, like letting John and his wife win. I thought about everything that had happened over the past few months, the way my life had spiraled out of control, the constant fear and anxiety that had become my new normal. I knew I couldn't keep living like this, but I also knew I couldn't just walk away without a fight. The next day, I called a lawyer. The legal process was slow and frustrating. My lawyer explained that workplace harassment cases were notoriously difficult to prove, especially when the perpetrators were careful not to leave a direct trail. But we built our case piece by piece, gathering evidence, documenting every incident, every interaction with HR. It was exhausting, but it felt good to be doing something, to be fighting back. Meanwhile, I continued to work, keeping my head down and avoiding John and his wife as much as possible. I knew they were aware of the lawsuit, but they didn't say anything to me directly. Instead, the harassment escalated. My car was keyed, my tires slashed. I found dead animals on my doorstep, their bodies mutilated and bloody. Each time, I documented everything, called the police, added it to my case file. It felt surreal, like I was living in some kind of nightmare that I couldn't wake up from, but I refused to back down. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, we got a court date. The trial was long and grueling, every day a new battle. John and his wife denied everything, of course, painting me as some kind of unstable, paranoid individual who was out to ruin their lives. But we had the evidence, and my lawyer was relentless. We pressed John and his wife over and over, and the more we did, the more my lawyer, as well as the judge, started seeing the inconsistencies in their story. The details didn't match, the recounts were off, things were just not aligning how they were saying. In the end, the judge ruled in my favor. It wasn't a complete victory. The damages awarded were modest, and John and his wife weren't fired, though they were placed on probation probation, but it was enough. Enough to prove that I hadn't imagined it, that I wasn't crazy. I took the severance package and left the company. It was bittersweet, leaving behind a place I'd once loved, where I'd made so many memories. But it was also liberating. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe again. I found a new job, in a new city, far away from John and his wife, and all the pain they'd caused. It wasn't easy, starting over, but it was worth it. I made new friends, built a new life for myself, and I never looked back. John tried to contact me a few times after the trial, leaving long, rambling voicemails about how sorry he was, how he wanted to make things right. I deleted them without listening. I didn't need his apology. I'd moved on. Looking back, I realized that losing John's friendship was one of the best things that had ever happened to me. It forced me to see my own worth, to stand up for myself in a way I never had before. It was a painful lesson, but one I was grateful for. And as for John and his wife, I didn't know what happened to them, and I didn't care. They were part of my past, a past I'd left behind. I was focused on my future now, and it was bright, because I knew, no matter what happened, I would never let anyone make me feel small or unworthy again. I had found my strength, and I would never let it go.